The crimson sands of the Korvathi arena stretched endlessly beneath twin purple suns, stained with the blood of countless warriors who had fallen in the name of entertainment. Spectators from dozens of species filled the massive coliseum, their alien voices creating a cacophony of excitement that echoed off the towering obsidian walls. The arena had stood for 3,000 years, witnessing the rise and fall of galactic empires, but today would mark something unprecedented in its blood-soaked history. High above in the premium viewing boxes, Ambassador Thyrix of the Korvathi Empire adjusted his ceremonial robes and gazed down at the arena floor with satisfaction. The amphibian diplomat's skin glistened with moisture as he prepared to address the crowd. This was no ordinary gladiatorial match. Today's event would serve as both entertainment and a calculated demonstration of power, designed to break the spirit of the newest additions to the galactic community. The humans had been discovered only 6 months ago, inhabiting a small blue planet on the outer rim of the galaxy. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards, barely capable of interplanetary travel, yet they had somehow managed to resist initial conquest attempts. The Galactic Council had decided that rather than waste resources on a prolonged campaign, they would make an example through more civilized means. Citizens of the galaxy, Ambassador Thyrix's voice boomed through the arena's sound amplifiers, causing several species to cover their auditory organs. Today we witness the formal introduction of the species known as humans to our glorious civilization. As is tradition, they will demonstrate their worth in combat against one of our finest warriors. In the holding cells beneath the arena, 12-year-old Marcus Chen sat quietly on a stone bench, his small frame dwarfed by the massive alien architecture around him. Unlike the other prisoners who paced frantically or wailed in despair, the human child remained perfectly still, his dark eyes focused on something only he could see. The guards had been puzzled by his calm demeanor since his arrival. Marcus had been selected specifically for this demonstration. The Galactic Council believed that forcing a human child to fight would break the morale of any watching humans and prove their species' weakness. They had chosen him from among the human refugees not for any particular skill, but because his youth would make the spectacle more psychologically devastating for his species. The boy's parents had died during the initial contact with galactic forces, leaving him alone among the stars. The alien psychologist had assured the council that a traumatized human child would provide the perfect victim for their demonstration. They could not have been more wrong about what trauma had forged within Marcus Chen. From his cell, Marcus could hear the crowd's roar growing louder as anticipation built. He closed his eyes and remembered his father's words from their last conversation aboard the refugee ship. His father had been a martial arts instructor back on Earth, a man who understood that true strength came not from size or weapons, but from knowledge, timing, and the will to survive. "Remember, son," his father had whispered as the alien ship surrounded them, "humans have survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters that would have destroyed other species. We adapt, we endure, and when pushed to our limits, we become something our enemies never expect." The cell door groaned open, revealing 2 towering Korvathi guards in ornate armor. Their reptilian faces showed amusement as they looked down at the small human child. One of them spoke in heavily accented Standard Galactic. "Time to entertain the masses, little one. Try to make it last more than a few seconds." Marcus stood up slowly, his movements fluid despite his apparent youth. He had grown up in his father's dojo, learning ancient fighting techniques that traced their lineage back thousands of years to warriors who had faced impossible odds with nothing but skill and determination. The alien saw a frightened child. They failed to recognize the predator that evolution had crafted over millions of years. As they escorted him through the corridors toward the arena, Marcus observed everything. The guard positions, the weapon placements, the emergency exits, the structural weaknesses in the ancient stonework. His father had taught him that awareness was the first weapon, and Marcus had been honing that weapon since the moment of his capture. The corridor opened into blinding sunlight as they emerged onto the arena floor. The roar of the crowd was deafening, a mixture of excitement and bloodlust from dozens of different species. Marcus squinted against the light and saw his opponent for the first time. Gorvak the Destroyer stood 8 feet tall, his muscular frame covered in chitinous armor that had been forged from the shells of creatures he had personally slain. The insectoid warrior's forearms each ended in razor-sharp claws that had never failed to find their mark. His compound eyes reflected the arena lights like black mirrors as he studied the small human with obvious disdain. The crowd fell silent as Ambassador Thyrix stood to address them once more. Behold Gorvak the Destroyer, champion of 17 worlds, victor of over 300 arena battles. He has agreed to demonstrate the proper place of humans in our galactic hierarchy. Gorvak raised all 4 arms to acknowledge the crowd's cheers, his mandibles clicking in satisfaction. He had requested this fight personally, eager to be the one who would crush human hopes before the watching galaxy. The warrior had studied recordings of human combat techniques and found them laughably primitive compared to the sophisticated fighting styles developed by advanced species. Marcus stood in the center of the arena, appearing tiny and helpless beneath the massive dome. The betting pools had already closed with odds of 1,000 to 1 against the human child lasting more than 30 seconds. The spectators in the premium boxes laughed and pointed, treating the upcoming slaughter as an amusing diversion. But in the refugee section where captured humans were forced to watch, there was only silence. They saw their future in that small figure standing alone on the blood-stained sand. If their children could be broken so easily, what hope did their species have? The arena master raised his ceremonial staff, its crystal tip glowing with energy. "Let the demonstration begin," he announced, and the staff came down with a sound like thunder. Gorvak immediately charged forward, all 4 arms spread wide to prevent any escape. His speed was impressive for such a large creature, and his tactical analysis was flawless. He would grab the small human and make the death quick but visible, ensuring maximum psychological impact on the watching humans while maintaining the dignity of a true warrior. The crowd held its collective breath as the gap between predator and prey closed rapidly. This was the moment that would define humanity's place in the galactic order. Marcus moved with a fluidity that defied explanation. As Gorvak's massive form bore down on him, the human child seemed to simply step aside at the last possible moment, his small frame sliding past the warrior's reaching claws like water flowing around a stone. The movement was so subtle, so perfectly timed, that many spectators thought the boy had simply stumbled. But Gorvak felt the difference immediately. The human's evasion had not been random or panicked. It had been calculated, precise, and executed with the understanding of momentum and physics that the warrior had never encountered from such a small opponent. As his charge carried him past the boy, Gorvak tried to adjust his trajectory, but found himself slightly off balance. That was when Marcus struck. The blow came from an angle that Gorvak's compound eyes could barely track. Marcus had dropped low and pivoted, his small fist connecting with a specific point just behind the warrior's third leg. To the crowd it looked like a harmless tap, barely worth noticing. But Marcus had spent years learning the pressure points of various body types, and insectoid anatomy followed predictable patterns. Gorvak's leg buckled as nerve clusters that had never been targeted in arena combat sent waves of paralysis through his lower body. The mighty warrior stumbled, confusion replacing confidence as his body failed to respond to his commands. He had been struck by something that felt like a child's punch, yet somehow, his combat effectiveness was compromised. The arena fell silent. This was not how these demonstrations were supposed to unfold. Gorvak was meant to crush the human child in seconds, not stumble around like an injured insect. In the premium viewing boxes, Ambassador Thyrix leaned forward with concern, his amphibian features darkening with anger. Marcus did not pause to admire his handiwork. While Gorvak struggled with his compromised balance, the boy moved again. This time he went high, his small body seeming to float upward as he used the warrior's own body as a springboard. His father had taught him that size differences could be advantages if properly exploited, turning an opponent's mass against them. As Marcus reached the height of his leap, he struck again. His fingers, trained since childhood in precise pressure point techniques, found the cluster of nerve junctions at the base of Gorvak's neck, where the warrior's natural armor had a small gap. The touch was gentle, almost caressing, but it sent specific electrical impulses through the insectoid's nervous system. Gorvak's upper arms went numb instantly. The warrior who had never lost a battle, who had crushed opponents 3 times his size, suddenly found himself unable to coordinate his movements. His mandibles clicked in panic as he tried to understand what was happening to him. The human child had barely touched him, yet his body was failing in ways he had never experienced. The crowd began to murmur with confusion and growing unease. This was not the decisive demonstration they had been promised. The small human was not cowering or begging for mercy. Instead, he moved around the arena with a strange confidence, seeming to study his opponent like a scientist examining a specimen. Marcus circled Gorvac slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. He had learned long ago that in martial arts, patience was often more valuable than strength. His father had taught him about the ancient human warriors, who had faced larger opponents by understanding their weaknesses and exploiting them with surgical precision. The boy's eyes took in every detail of Gorvac's condition. The warrior's breathing was becoming labored as his respiratory system struggled with the nerve disruption. His compound eyes were having difficulty tracking movement as his visual processing centers dealt with the unexpected neural interference. Most importantly, his pride was making him predictable. Gorvac lunged forward again, desperation driving him to use his remaining functional arm in a wide, sweeping attack. But desperation made warriors sloppy, and Marcus had been waiting for exactly this kind of mistake. He stepped inside the arc of the swing, moving closer to his opponent rather than away. Confusing the warrior's targeting systems this time, Marcus's strike targeted the complex nerve cluster that controlled Gorvac's primary breathing spiracles. The technique was one his father had adapted from ancient pressure point arts, modified through careful study of alien anatomy texts that the humans had been given during their processing. The touch was barely visible, lasting less than a second, but its effects were immediate and dramatic. Gorvac's breathing became ragged and panicked. The warrior who had dominated arena combat for decades suddenly found himself gasping for air as his respiratory system struggled to function. His compound eyes widened in terror as he realized that the small human had somehow turned his own body against him. The crowd's murmurs had grown into concerned whispers. In the refugee section, captured humans watched with growing amazement as their representative not only survived, but seemed to be systematically dismantling a legendary warrior. Children who had given up hope began to sit up straighter, and parents who had accepted defeat started to believe that perhaps their species was not as helpless as they had been told. Marcus remained calm and focused, showing no emotion as he continued his methodical destruction of his opponent. This was not about vengeance or anger. This was about survival and sending a message to the galaxy about what humans truly were when pushed to their limits. As Gorvac struggled with his compromised systems, Marcus moved for his final strike. The boy approached from the warrior's blind spot, moving with the silent grace that his father had spent years teaching him. Every movement was economical, purposeful, designed to achieve maximum effect with minimum energy expenditure. The last strike was almost gentle. Marcus reached up and touched a specific point on Gorvac's head, just below his compound eyes where the insectoid's brainstem connected to his sensory processing centers. The pressure point technique was thousands of years old, developed by human warriors who understood that sometimes the most effective attacks were those that appeared harmless. Gorvac's world went dark as his sensory systems shut down in sequence. Vision, hearing, spatial awareness, all of it disappeared as his nervous system finally gave up its struggle against the precisely targeted disruptions. The mighty warrior, champion of 17 worlds, victor of over 300 battles, collapsed onto the crimson sand without dignity or grace. The arena fell completely silent. Tens of thousands of spectators from dozens of species stared in absolute disbelief at the scene before them. The human child stood calmly over the fallen champion, his breathing barely elevated, his expression serene. 3 seconds. The fight that was supposed to demonstrate human weakness had lasted exactly 3 seconds from first contact to final collapse. Marcus looked up at the stunned faces in the crowd, then turned his gaze toward the premium viewing boxes where Ambassador Theric sat frozen in shock. When the boy spoke, his voice carried clearly through the arena's silence, amplified by the same systems that had been meant to broadcast his screams of defeat. "My name is Marcus Chen," he said simply. "I am 12 years old and I am human. We are not your victims." The silence that followed Marcus's declaration stretched across the arena like a physical presence. Ambassador Theric remained frozen in his viewing box, his amphibian brain struggling to process what he had just witnessed. The carefully orchestrated demonstration meant to break human morale had instead become something else entirely. The small figure standing calmly in the center of the arena had just accomplished the impossible. In the medical bay beneath the arena, emergency teams worked frantically over Gorvak's unconscious form. The destroyer's vital signs were stable, but every neural pathway they examined showed signs of precise surgical disruption. The chief medical officer, a spider-like creature from the Arachnid Collective, studied the readouts with growing amazement. "How is this possible?" she muttered to her assistants. "These pressure points, it's like the human knew exactly how our nervous systems work, but they've only been in galactic space for months." What the medical team didn't understand was that humans had spent thousands of years learning to fight creatures larger and stronger than themselves. From the first caveman who brought down a mammoth to the martial artist who developed pressure point techniques, humanity had always survived through knowledge and adaptability rather than raw strength. Meanwhile, in the refugee section, the captured humans sat in stunned silence. Children who had watched their parents die during first contact, adults who had accepted their fate as slaves to a superior galactic civilization, all stared at the boy who had just redefined what it meant to be human in this larger universe. Dr. Sarah Chen, a xenobiologist who had been among the first humans captured, found her scientific mind racing. She had spent her career studying alien life forms, but she had never considered how humanity's evolutionary path might have prepared them for encounters with such diverse species. The pressure point techniques that Marcus had used were based on fundamental neural architecture that appeared universal among complex life forms. "We've been looking at this all wrong," she whispered to the human sitting next to her. "They think we're primitive because our technology is less advanced, but we're the only species that evolved on a planet with such biological diversity. We learned to fight and survive against thousands of different opponent types." On the arena floor, Marcus remained perfectly still as alien security forces surrounded him. The guards approached cautiously, weapons drawn but uncertain how to proceed. The boy had not broken any arena rules technically. He had simply won a sanctioned combat in a manner that no one had expected. The head of arena security, a crystalline being whose species communicated through light patterns, flickered nervously as he tried to establish communication with his superiors. The situation had moved far beyond normal protocols. Gorvak the Destroyer was not just any warrior. He was a symbol of galactic martial superiority. His defeat at the hands of a human child would have political ramifications that reached the highest levels of government. Ambassador Thyrix finally found his voice, though it cracked with uncertainty. "The contest is concluded," he announced through the arena's speakers. "The human has demonstrated their species' combat capabilities, but the damage was already spreading beyond the arena. News feeds across the galaxy carried live coverage of the event, and reaction was immediate. On worlds where humans were held as prisoners, guards suddenly found themselves looking at their captives with new uncertainty. The narrative of human weakness that had justified their enslavement was crumbling in real time. In the Corvati capital, High Admiral Vrak received emergency communications from 17 different worlds reporting unusual behavior among human prisoners. Nothing overtly rebellious, but a subtle change in demeanor that veteran guards recognized as dangerous. The humans had stopped acting like defeated victims. Marcus was escorted from the arena under heavy guard, but not before every human in the refugee section had seen him clearly. As he passed their viewing area, he made brief eye contact with several individuals, and each saw something that rekindled hope they thought was lost forever. The boy was not just a warrior. He was a reminder of what humans could be when they stopped accepting limitations. The holding cells beneath the arena had been designed to break the spirit of defeated gladiators, but Marcus seemed completely unaffected by the oppressive atmosphere. He sat calmly on the stone bench, his breathing steady and controlled, reviewing the fight in his mind the way his father had taught him to analyze training sessions. The victory had been easier than expected. Gorvak was skilled by galactic standards, but his fighting style was rigid and predictable. He had relied on size, strength, and intimidation rather than adapting to his opponent. The warrior's compound eyes, which seemed like an advantage, actually created blind spots that a trained fighter could exploit. More importantly, Marcus had confirmed something his father had theorized during their capture. The various alien species, despite their technological advancement, seemed to lack the genetic diversity that had shaped human evolution. They had developed in relatively stable environments with limited biological challenges, making them vulnerable to tactics developed by a species that had fought for survival against everything, from saber-toothed tigers to venomous spiders. Hours after the fight, emergency sessions were being called in legislative bodies across the galaxy. The footage of Gorvak's defeat was being analyzed by military strategists who were beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about human capabilities. If a 12-year-old could disable a legendary warrior in 3 seconds, what could trained human soldiers accomplish? On the prison transport ship holding the captured humans from Earth, conditions began to change subtly. Guards who had previously treated their prisoners with casual contempt now maintained more respectful distances. Food rations improved slightly. The daily indoctrination sessions that were supposed to convince humans of their natural inferiority were quietly suspended. Captain Zephyr, the ship's commander, found himself studying intelligence reports about human history with growing concern. The species that had seemed so primitive during first contact had actually survived multiple extinction events, global wars, and natural disasters that would have destroyed most civilizations. Their apparent technological backwardness was simply because they were young, not because they were weak. In the refugee section of the arena, Dr. Sarah Chen had become an unofficial leader among the human captives. Her scientific background helped her understand the implications of what Marcus had accomplished. She began quietly organizing the humans, not for immediate rebellion, but for something more subtle and potentially more dangerous to their captors. "We need to document everything," she whispered to the others during the brief periods when guards were distracted. "Every alien species we encounter, every weakness we observe, every technological system we can analyze. Marcus has shown us that humans have advantages we didn't recognize, but we need to understand them systematically." The humans began to change. Where once they had been passive victims accepting their fate, they now observed their captors with the clinical interest of scientists studying specimens. They noted guard rotations, technological vulnerabilities, and the behavioral patterns of different alien species. They were becoming something their captors had never expected, an intelligence network in the heart of the galactic establishment. Marcus remained in his cell, but his victory had already achieved something far more valuable than freedom. He had reminded his entire species that humans were not victims by nature. They were survivors, adapters, and when necessary, predators who had earned their place at the top of Earth's food chain. Through millions of years of evolutionary pressure, the galaxy was about to learn that humans had not survived ice ages and asteroid impacts by being weak. They had endured by being the most adaptable, most persistent, and most dangerous species their planet had ever produced. And now they were no longer alone on one small world in the Outer Rim. The 3-second fight that was meant to break human spirit had instead awakened something that would reshape the balance of power across the stars. 3 days after the arena incident, emergency councils convened across the galaxy as the implications of Marcus's victory rippled through every level of galactic society. What had been intended as a simple demonstration of human weakness had instead exposed fundamental flaws in how the galaxy's dominant species understood warfare, biology, and the nature of intelligence itself. On the industrial world of Mechanicus Prime, human prisoners working in the deuterium refineries began displaying behavior that alarmed their overseers. The humans had always been considered ideal laborers due to their apparent compliance and lack of technological sophistication. But now they moved through the facilities with a different kind of awareness, their eyes cataloging weaknesses and inefficiencies that their captors had never noticed. Foreman Crux, a cybernetically enhanced member of the Techno Collective, reviewed security footage with growing unease. The humans weren't rebelling or causing obvious trouble, but something fundamental had changed in their behavior. They worked with the same apparent obedience, but their movements had become more purposeful, more coordinated. "It's like they're mapping the entire facility," Crux reported to his superiors through direct neural link. "Every human now knows the location of every critical system, every emergency protocol, every security weakness. They're acting like an intelligence operation disguised as a labor force." The transformation was not limited to industrial facilities. On agricultural worlds, human farm workers had begun demonstrating an unprecedented understanding of alien crop genetics and soil management. On research stations, human test subjects were asking questions that revealed they had been systematically observing and analyzing their captors' scientific methods. Dr. Vorth, the galaxy's leading expert on primitive species integration, found himself completely revising his theories about human psychology. In his laboratory on Cerebral Station, he studied hours of surveillance footage showing humans in various captive environments. The change was subtle but undeniable. The species was learning and adapting at a rate that defied all previous models. "They're not acting like a conquered species," he dictated to his research logs. "They're behaving like deep-cover operatives who have been activated." Every human facility reports the same phenomenon: increased awareness, systematic observation, and what appears to be coordinated intelligence gathering. Meanwhile, in the lower levels of the Korvathi arena, Marcus had become something of a phenomenon among the gladiatorial community. Warriors from dozens of species requested meetings with the human child, ostensibly to understand his fighting techniques, but actually driven by a deeper curiosity about human capabilities. Thane Ironscale, a reptilian warrior who had dominated arena combat for 5 years, sat across from Marcus in the visitor's cell with barely contained fascination. "How did you know exactly where to strike?" he asked. "Gorvak's anatomy is classified military information. No outsider should understand insectoid neural architecture well enough to target those specific pressure points." Marcus looked at the scaled warrior with the same calm expression he had worn in the arena. "My father taught me that all complex life follows similar patterns. Your species developed from predatory reptiles, which means your spine carries nerve clusters at predictable intervals. Your scales protect most of your body, but they create natural gaps at joint intersections where nerve bundles have to pass close to the surface." The casual precision of Marcus's analysis sent chills through Thane's cold-blooded system. The human child was describing advanced xenobiological warfare techniques as if they were basic knowledge. But how could humans develop such understanding without access to galactic anatomical databases? "We had thousands of different species on our world," Marcus explained simply. "Mammals, reptiles, insects, arachnids, fish, birds. We learned to fight all of them to survive. Your galaxy has fewer species, types than a single continent on Earth." This revelation was being repeated in similar conversations across the galaxy as humans interacted with their captors in new ways. Dr. Sarah Chen, now recognized as an informal leader among human refugees, had begun conducting systematic interviews with aliens in her facility. Her scientific training allowed her to ask questions that seemed innocent, but revealed critical information about galactic technology and social structures. "The fascinating thing about your interstellar communication network," she mentioned casually to a technician, "is how it relies on quantum entanglement synchronization. We theorized about similar systems on Earth but never had the materials to build them. The crystalline matrices you use must require specific harmonic frequencies to maintain coherence across galactic distances." The technician, flattered by what seemed like admiring interest from a primitive species, enthusiastically explained the technical details. He had no idea that Dr. Chen was systematically mapping the entire galactic communication infrastructure through such conversations. Similar information gathering operations were occurring wherever humans were held. They asked questions about alien psychology under the guise of trying to understand their captors. They showed interest in alien technology as if marveling at its sophistication. They demonstrated curiosity about galactic history and politics as though eager to learn their place in the larger universe. What their captors failed to recognize was that humans had developed these social intelligence techniques over millennia of tribal warfare and diplomatic negotiation. Every question was calculated, every expression of admiration was designed to encourage revelation of sensitive information. The galactic intelligence services were slow to recognize the pattern because they had never encountered a species that used systematic information warfare as a survival strategy. Most alien civilizations had developed in relatively isolated environments with limited competition, making them vulnerable to humans who had evolved in the ultimate competitive ecosystem. On the fortress world of Nexus Command, General Korth reviewed reports that painted an increasingly troubling picture. Human populations across 17 worlds were displaying coordinated behavior patterns that suggested a level of organization that should have been impossible for a recently conquered species. "They're not communicating through any channels we can monitor," his intelligence chief reported. "No electronic signals, no written messages, no obvious coordination mechanisms. Yet humans in facilities thousands of light years apart, are exhibiting similar behavioral changes. What the general didn't understand was that humans had developed nonverbal communication systems that could operate without technology. Subtle changes in posture, seemingly casual gestures, even the way they arranged their personal belongings could convey complex information to other humans who knew how to interpret the signs Marcus had unknowingly triggered, something primal in human nature, the pack hunting instincts that had allowed their ancestors to bring down creatures many times their size through coordination and shared intelligence. Humans across the galaxy were unconsciously forming a vast intelligence network using methods that their technologically dependent captors couldn't detect. The arena victory had accomplished something more profound than anyone realized. It had reminded humans of what they truly were beneath the veneer of modern civilization. They were persistence hunters who had chased prey across continents until it collapsed from exhaustion. They were social predators who could coordinate complex strategies without apparent communication. They were the apex species from a world so dangerous that survival required constant adaptation and innovation. In his cell, Marcus continued his own patient observation of the arena's security systems and personnel rotations. He had no immediate plan for escape. That was not the point. The point was to demonstrate to any watching humans that they retained the capabilities that had made them masters of their home world. The galaxy had expected to find primitive warriors who could be easily dominated through superior technology. Instead, they had encountered something far more dangerous, a species that treated every challenge as a learning opportunity and every defeat as intelligence gathering for future victory. The 3-second fight had ended, but the war for human freedom was just beginning, and the aliens were slowly realizing that they had seriously underestimated what they were fighting against. 1 month after the arena incident, the Galactic Council faced an unprecedented crisis. Human populations across their territory had achieved something that military strategists had deemed impossible. They had created a rebellion without weapons, without technology, and without apparent leadership structure. The uprising existed as a state of mind that had infected every human facility simultaneously. High Admiral Vrak stood before the emergency assembly, his reptilian features drawn with exhaustion as he delivered a report that would reshape galactic policy for generations. Honored counselors, we must face the reality that our initial assessment of human capabilities was catastrophically flawed. These beings do not conform to any known model of primitive species integration. The evidence was overwhelming. On 17 worlds, human populations had demonstrated the ability to shut down critical infrastructure without causing permanent damage, essentially holding their captors hostage through displays of technical knowledge that shouldn't have been possible. They had reverse-engineered alien technology through observation alone, identified security vulnerabilities that had existed for centuries, and coordinated responses across impossible distances without using any detectable communication methods. How is this coordination possible? Demanded Counselor Nexus, her cybernetic implants flashing with irritation. Our monitoring systems detect no electronic communications, no written messages, no technological coordination mechanisms. Yet humans separated by thousands of light years are implementing identical strategies. Dr. Vorth, now recognized as the galaxy's foremost expert on human psychology, had spent weeks developing his theory. Honorable counselors, I believe we have encountered something unprecedented. A species that has evolved collective intelligence mechanisms that operate below our technological detection thresholds. Their coordination appears to be based on behavioral pattern recognition and social instinct rather than explicit communication. The implications were staggering. If humans could coordinate complex operations through unconscious social mechanisms, they represented a form of intelligence that the galaxy's technology-dependent species couldn't fully understand or counter. Traditional methods of controlling subject populations had proven ineffective against beings who could share information through subtle behavioral cues. In the Korvathi arena, Marcus had become something far more significant than a gladiator. He was now consulted by alien strategists who were trying to understand human capabilities, though they remained unaware that every conversation was providing him with detailed intelligence about galactic military structures and psychological weaknesses. General Thraxus, the arena's military liaison, reviewed combat footage with Marcus in what he thought was a debriefing session. Your defeat of Gorvak was tactically perfect, but the techniques you used are unlike anything in our combat databases. How did your species develop such precise anatomical knowledge without access to galactic medical texts? Marcus watched the footage calmly, noting details about alien military protocols that the general revealed unconsciously. We had to learn anatomy to survive. If you're hunting a tiger with primitive weapons, you need to know exactly where to strike to disable it quickly. If you make a mistake, you die. But Gorvak isn't a tiger, the general protested. He's an entirely different species with completely different biological architecture. All complex organisms follow similar patterns, Marcus explained patiently. Nerve clusters at joint intersections, respiratory vulnerabilities, pressure points where circulatory systems pass close to the surface. My father taught me that if you understand the principles, you can adapt them to any opponent. The general was recording everything, believing he was gathering intelligence about human combat capabilities. He failed to recognize that Marcus was simultaneously learning everything about alien military thinking, technological dependencies, and strategic blind spots. Similar intelligence exchanges were occurring throughout the galactic prison system. Humans demonstrated enough knowledge to prove their capabilities, while carefully extracting information about their captors' weaknesses. They had turned their imprisonment into the most comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation in galactic history. Dr. Sarah Chen had emerged as the unofficial coordinator of human resistance efforts, though she held no formal authority and issued no direct orders. Instead, she had perfected methods of sharing information that appeared to be casual social interaction, but actually constituted sophisticated strategic communication. During supervised meal periods, humans would arrange their food in specific patterns that conveyed detailed technical information. They developed walking routes that formed geometric shapes visible only from above, creating messages that could be interpreted by humans in orbital facilities. They even used the timing of their daily activities to encode complex data about alien psychology and technology. It's like they've turned every aspect of daily life into a communication system, observed Security Chief Vex as he reviewed surveillance footage from multiple facilities. They're having conversations without speaking, sharing technical manuals without writing, and coordinating military operations without any apparent command structure. The transformation of human behavior had profound psychological effects on their alien captors. Species that had evolved in relatively peaceful environments found themselves increasingly uncomfortable around beings who treated every interaction as potential intelligence gathering and every situation as a tactical challenge. On the industrial world of Mechanicus Prime, human workers had begun demonstrating understanding of alien manufacturing processes that exceeded the knowledge of their supervisors. They casually mentioned inefficiencies that could save thousands of credits in production costs, suggested improvements that could increase output by significant percentages, and asked innocent questions that revealed they understood the facility's entire supply chain better than beings who had designed it. Foreman Crux found himself in the unprecedented position of learning from his prisoners. They're not just following orders anymore, he reported to his superiors. They're actively improving our processes while making it clear they could just as easily sabotage them. It's like working alongside consultants who happen to be captives. The same phenomenon was occurring across the galaxy as humans revealed capabilities that made their continued imprisonment both logistically challenging and economically questionable. They had become too valuable as technical advisors and too dangerous as potential saboteurs to treat as simple slave labor. In the highest levels of galactic government, emergency committees worked frantically to develop new policies for managing a situation that had no precedent in galactic history. The humans had not technically rebelled, but they had made it clear that their cooperation was voluntary and could be withdrawn at any moment. We're facing a choice, Admiral Vrak explained to the Emergency Council. We can attempt to maintain control through increased force, which will likely result in the humans demonstrating their sabotage capabilities, or we can acknowledge that these beings represent something entirely new in our experience. The debate that followed would reshape galactic civilization. For the first time in recorded history, a supposedly primitive species had forced advanced civilizations to reconsider fundamental assumptions about intelligence, technology, and the nature of power itself. Marcus remained in his cell, but he had accomplished something that no human had imagined possible when their species first encountered the galaxy. He had forced an entire interstellar civilization to recognize that humans were not victims to be pitied or resources to be exploited. They were competitors who played by different rules, thought in different patterns, and possessed capabilities that the galaxy was only beginning to understand. The 3-second fight had been just the beginning of a much larger conversation about what it truly meant to be intelligent. In a universe full of diverse life forms, the galaxy was about to learn that humans had something more valuable than advanced technology. They had the ability to adapt, survive, and ultimately thrive in any environment where intelligence mattered more than raw power. 6 months after Marcus Chen stood over the fallen form of Gorvak the Destroyer, the Galactic Council convened for the most significant legislative session in over 1,000 years. The emergency protocols that had been triggered by human resistance activities had evolved into something unprecedented: the first complete re-evaluation of galactic species classification and rights in recorded history. The Grand Assembly Hall on Nexus Prime had been modified to accommodate human representatives, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. Dr. Sarah Chen sat at a consultation table beside Ambassador Thyrix, her presence marking the transformation of humans from captive specimens to recognized participants in galactic affairs. High Counselor Zephyros pulsed with formal colors as he addressed the assembly. Honored representatives, we gather today to address what historians will undoubtedly record as the most significant miscalculation in our civilization's expansion protocols. The species we designated as primitive humans have demonstrated capabilities that require fundamental revision of our understanding of intelligence and technological development. The evidence presented to the Council was overwhelming. Human populations across 17 worlds had not only maintained coordinated resistance for months, but had actively improved the efficiency and safety of alien facilities, while making their strategic capabilities unmistakably clear. They had achieved something that galactic military theorists had considered impossible: leverage without weapons, power without technology, and influence without formal authority. Marcus Chen, now 13 and bearing the unofficial title of First Contact Representative, stood to address the assembly. His calm demeanor and careful choice of words reflected months of preparation for this moment. The boy who had won a fight in 3 seconds was about to reshape interstellar law with equally precise timing. Honorable counselors, Marcus began, his young voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. My species offers the galaxy something that has been missing from your civilization for millennia: the perspective of beings who evolved in constant competition with diverse life forms. We do not seek to challenge your technological achievements, but to complement them with capabilities your species never needed to develop. The proposal that followed represented months of careful negotiation between human representatives and galactic authorities. Rather than simple freedom, humans were offering something far more valuable: a partnership that would enhance galactic civilization through the introduction of adaptive intelligence methods that no single species could develop alone. We propose the establishment of human advisory councils on every world where our people currently reside, Dr. Chen explained to the assembly. These councils would serve dual purposes, providing our people with meaningful participation in galactic society while offering your governments access to analytical capabilities that could solve problems your current methods cannot address. The transformation in alien attitudes toward humans was remarkable. Species that had initially viewed humanity as primitive slaves now competed for access to human consultants. The mining operations, where humans had demonstrated systematic understanding of geological processes, reported productivity increases of 40%. Agricultural facilities, where humans applied their ecosystem management expertise, achieved harvest yields that broke historical records. General Thraxus, who had spent months studying human tactical capabilities, presented a military assessment that stunned the assembly. Honorable counselors, human strategic thinking operates on principles that our war colleges never taught, because our species never needed to develop them. They treat every conflict as an information warfare operation, every interaction as intelligence gathering, and every challenge as an opportunity for adaptation. The general's analysis revealed something profound about the nature of intelligence itself. Galactic species had achieved technological advancement by specializing in specific capabilities and developing tools to overcome environmental challenges. Humans had achieved survival by becoming generalists who could adapt their thinking to any situation without relying on external technology. They represent something unique in our experience. General Thraxis continued, a species that has weaponized intelligence itself, rather than simply using intelligence to create weapons. This makes them simultaneously the most valuable potential allies and the most formidable potential opponents we have encountered. The debate that followed revealed deep divisions within galactic society about the implications of human capabilities. Some species viewed humanity as a threat to established power structures, while others saw them as the key to solving problems that had plagued galactic civilization for centuries. Counselor Nexus, representing the Techno-Collective, voiced the concerns of technology-dependent species. If we grant humans full citizenship rights, we legitimize the concept that technological advancement is not the sole measure of civilizational worth. This could destabilize the entire basis of galactic hierarchy, but other voices spoke in favor of embracing the changes that human presence represented. Agricultural Administrator Bloom, whose food production networks had been revolutionized by human ecological insights, argued passionately for integration. These beings have shown us solutions to problems we didn't even know we had. Their different perspective isn't a threat to our civilization. It's an enhancement that could benefit every species in the galaxy. The economic arguments were equally compelling. Facilities that had implemented human advisory systems reported not only increased efficiency, but also innovations that opened entirely new technological possibilities. Humans had demonstrated the ability to see connections between different systems that escaped more specialized alien thinking. Marcus listened to the debate with the same patient attention he had shown in the arena. When he was called upon to respond to concerns about human intentions, his answer reflected the wisdom his father had taught him about the difference between strength and violence. We do not seek dominance, he explained simply. Humans learned long ago that the strongest predators are not necessarily the most successful. Success comes from adaptation, cooperation, and the ability to find solutions that benefit entire ecosystems rather than individual hunters. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than human supporters had hoped, but decisive enough to establish new precedent. By a margin of 63 to 37, the Galactic Council approved the Human Integration Protocol, granting humans full citizenship, rights and establishing the framework for their participation in galactic society as equals rather than subjects. The decision represented more than just freedom for human populations across the galaxy. It marked the first time that galactic civilization had acknowledged that technological advancement was not the only path to intelligence, and that diversity of thinking could be more valuable than uniformity of capability. Dr. Sarah Chen stood to address the assembly one final time. Honorable counselors, today marks the beginning of a new era for galactic civilization. Humans bring to this partnership not just our analytical capabilities, but our commitment to the principle that true strength comes from unity rather than dominance. As the session concluded, Marcus reflected on how far humanity had traveled from that moment in the arena when everything had seemed hopeless. His 3-second victory had been just the opening move in a game that was ultimately about proving that intelligence came in many forms and that survival skills developed through millions of years of evolution could not be replicated by technology alone. The galaxy would never again make the mistake of confusing technological simplicity with intellectual limitation, and humans would take their place among the stars not as conquered subjects, but as partners who brought unique gifts to a civilization that was finally ready to grow beyond its own assumptions. The boy who had once stood alone against an impossible opponent now stood with his entire species as they began their journey into a larger universe where being human was not a limitation to overcome, but a strength to be celebrated.